The Wren room filled up the way it always did on a Friday. Slowly at first, the way a kettle builds before it sings. By 7 o'clock, the white tablecloths held their candles steady. The low hum of silverware and conversation had settled into something warm, and Margaret O'Say had already ordered the rack of lamb because it was her anniversary, and her husband Bernard had told her to get whatever she wanted. She was watching the door when the woman came in. She noticed her, the way you notice someone who carries herself with a certain weight. Not heaviness, but the kind of solidity that says nothing in the room surprises me, and nothing in the room diminishes me either. The woman was in her early 60s, black, in a deep burgundy dress that had been chosen with care. She wore small pearl earrings and carried a slim evening bag, and she walked to the host stand the way you walk somewhere you have been invited. The host was a man named Garrett, young and neatly groomed, with the particular expression of a person who has decided the evening's business before anyone has spoken a word. He looked at her. He looked down at his lectern. He looked at her again. "Do you have a reservation?" he asked. "I do," the woman said. Her voice was level and warm, a teacher's voice, the kind that has spent decades carrying to the back row without raising itself. "Odom, Celeste Odom, 7 o'clock. Garrett ran his finger down the page. He turned a page. He ran his finger down again. He looked up with the expression of someone delivering news that is, unfortunately, quite final. "I'm not finding that." "It's there," Mrs. Odom said. "I have my confirmation number if you'd like it." "Ma'am, our system shows the room at capacity for this hour." Margaret glanced toward the door. The room was not at capacity. There were 4 tables with empty chairs, including the one by the window that had been empty since she and Bernard arrived. She picked up her water glass and set it down again. A couple came through the door behind Mrs. Odom. White, the man in a blazer, the woman in a gray wrap dress. Garrett looked past Mrs. Odom's shoulder. His whole bearing shifted. 2 for this evening? He was already reaching for menus. "Yes," the man said. "Right this way." He moved. He left Mrs. Odom standing at the host's stand and walked the couple to the table by the window, the one that had been empty since Margaret arrived. He set the menus down. He returned to the lectern. Mrs. Odom had not moved. She had not said a word while this happened. She stood exactly where she had been standing, her hands quiet, her face composed. "My confirmation number is November 7442R, she said. "That's the booking reference from your website, time-stamped 3 weeks ago." Garrett looked at his lectern again. "I don't see it, ma'am. You're welcome to wait at the bar and we'll do our best to accommodate you if something opens up." "I'm not leaving," Mrs. Odom said. Not loudly, not with a tremor in it. She said it the way you state a fact that does not require discussion, the way you'd say the door is on the left or the train arrives at noon. She said it and then she simply waited, her evening bag held in both hands in front of her, her eyes steady on the host stand. At table 6, Margaret put her fork down. Bernard was saying something about the wine, and she heard him the way you hear a radio in the next room. What she was watching was the woman at the door who had just been told there was no room for her at a restaurant where there clearly was room, and who was standing in the entrance of it with the composure of someone who has learned that the world does not always move quickly, but that it can be made to move. A young waiter named Tomas had watched all of this from the service station near the far wall. He was 26, in his 2nd year at the Wren room, and he had a rule he had made for himself a long time ago. The kind of rule that sounds simple and turns out to be harder than it sounds. When something is wrong, say something. He crossed the room. He leaned to the host stand and spoke in a low voice. "Garrett, do you want me to check the tablet system?" Garrett gave him a look that said, "This is not your table, and not your concern." Tomas held his ground. "Sometimes the book and the digital don't sync at the end of the week. Takes about 30 seconds. There was a pause. Garrett stepped aside with the kind of stiffness that means he already knows what 30 seconds is going to show. Tomas pulled up the tablet. He typed in the name. He found it. Odom, Celeste. Party of 1, 7 p.m. Confirmed. Window preference noted. He looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at the screen. A vein of color moved along his jaw. "Mrs. Odom," Tomas said, turning to her directly. "Your table is ready. I apologize for the delay." Mrs. Odom nodded, once. She did not say, "I told you." She did not say, "Of course it is." She simply nodded, the way a person nods when the world has finally caught up to what they already knew. But Garrett had not moved. He was standing very still, and Margaret, who had seen this particular stillness before, in other rooms, in other decades, in other confrontations, understood that there was a choice being made in real time. The tablet sat on the lectern with the reservation plainly on its screen. Whether it was wounded pride or something older and less conscious, Garrett had not stepped to escort Mrs. Odom, and a moment stretched that should not have been allowed to stretch. Margaret pushed her chair back. It made a sound on the marble floor, not a dramatic sound, the scrape of a chair, but in a room where the other sounds were low, it carried. She stood up. Bernard looked at her. She said, quietly, "Just a moment," and she walked to the host stand. She was 68 years old. She had spent 40 years as a pediatric nurse, and she was wearing her good earrings, and she did not raise her voice. "I believe this woman's reservation is confirmed," she said, looking at Garrett. "She's been standing here for some time. Will you seat her, or shall I find the maitre d'?" The room had quieted. It does that. A room will quiet in the way that rooms do when the current in it changes direction. At table 9, a man in his 50s put down his menu. He had heard the whole thing from where he sat. He was a quiet man, the type who reads the room before he speaks, and what he read now was that a woman who had done nothing wrong was still waiting. He stood up. "The lady's reservation is in the system," he said from his table, not shouting, just saying it into the room. "Might be time to call the manager." Across the aisle, at a table for 4, a woman in her 40s had her phone out. She had started recording 4 minutes ago, quietly, without a production about it. The way you do when you understand that documentation matters and theater doesn't. She hadn't said a word. She lowered the phone slightly but kept it in her hand. At table 12, near the back, an older white man, a retired accountant named Stewart who came to the Wren Room every third Friday and always ordered the Dover sole, stood up without speaking. He just stood. He didn't say anything. He stood the way people stand when they want the room to know where they are. That was 4. Tomas made 5. He was still at the host stand, beside the tablet with Mrs. Odom's name on the screen, and he had not gone anywhere. He would later tell his wife that he had been afraid, that was the honest word, and that he had stood there anyway, because the other word for afraid and still standing is something close to right. The maitre d', a woman named Renata, had come through the side door at the moment Stewart stood up. She took in the room in the practiced way of someone whose job is to understand a room in under 10 seconds. She looked at Garrett. She looked at the tablet. She looked at Mrs. Odom. "Mrs. Odom," she said, walking to her directly. "I'm Renata. I'm so sorry. Let me show you to your table." She picked up a menu herself. She walked Mrs. Odom to the table by the window, not the one they had given to the couple in the blazer, that was occupied now, but the corner window table, with the better view of the courtyard, the one they kept for guests who had been waiting. Renata pulled the chair out and placed the menu and said, "Your server will be right with you. Can I bring you something from the bar while you look?" "Just water, thank you," Mrs. Odom said. She sat down. She opened the menu. She did not look around the room the way someone looks around a room to collect a victory. She opened the menu and read it, because she had come to have dinner. Margaret returned to her table. Bernard had not said a word. He had watched all of it, and now he poured her wine and held the glass out to her with both hands, the way he had handed her things for 41 years. And she took it, and they looked at each other. "Happy anniversary," she said. "Happy anniversary," he said. Stewart sat back down. The man at table 9 returned to his menu. The woman at the table for 4 set her phone face down. The room found its hum again. Silver and candlelight and low conversation, but it was a different room than it had been 20 minutes earlier. Rooms can do that. They can hold a thing that happened and be changed by it. Renata found the general manager, a man named Douglas Fear, in his office at the end of the service corridor. She told him what had occurred in 3 sentences, the way someone tells you a thing when they do not want to cushion it or soften it, because softening it would have been a kind of insult to what had happened. Douglas said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Which table is she at?" He walked to the floor himself. He stopped at the corner window table. He introduced himself and he apologized, plainly and specifically, the way an apology means something when it names what was wrong, that Mrs. Odom's confirmed reservation was not found. that she was redirected to the bar while another party was seated, and that this should not have happened, and he was sorry it had. He asked if there was anything he could do for the evening. Mrs. Odom thanked him, and said she was fine, and that the soup she'd chosen looked lovely. Douglas returned to the corridor. He asked Tomas to step aside with him, and thanked him, on the record, for checking the system. He asked Tomas to document the tablet confirmation and timestamp it for HR. He placed Garrett on paid administrative leave pending review, effective that evening, calmly, without theater, the way you act on a thing when you know what it is. He had the guest relations coordinator reach out to Mrs. Odom the following morning with a written apology from the hotel and a note that the evening's dinner was on the house, which was not what made it right, but was what was proper. The following week, the Caldwell Hotel's food and beverage director convened a review of host stand intake procedure for the Wren Room and two sister restaurants. The outcome was a laminated verification protocol posted at every host stand, name and confirmation number, system checked at arrival, before any redirect. 3 sentences on a card, posted where a host could read it in 2 seconds. It would not give Mrs. Odom back the 20 minutes she had stood in the entrance of a room she had every right to walk into. Nothing does that. What it would do, what the protocol and the record and the written apology in her file would do, was say, in the language of policy, that it had happened, that it had been wrong, and that it would be logged and measured going forward. Margaret thought about that, later, when she and Bernard were in the car. She thought about the 20 minutes, and the 26-year-old waiter who had crossed the room, and the 4 other people who had stood or spoken, or simply placed themselves where the room could see them. 5 of them. She hadn't counted them at the time. She counted them in the car, riding home through the dark streets, the anniversary dinner warm in her, and the city lights going past the window. 5 ordinary people, no rank among them, no power, no particular title, just the decision, made one person at a time, to not look away. She thought that Mrs. Celeste Odom had not needed any of them to know who she was. She had known. She had stood at that host stand and stated her name and her confirmation number and declined to be moved, and she had done it alone, without asking anyone to witness it, and she would have continued doing it alone for as long as it took. They had witnessed it anyway. The Wren Room was dark now, the candles out, the tablecloths changed. Mrs. Odom was home, or on her way home, having had the soup she'd chosen and whatever came after it. The table by the courtyard window was empty. It had been her table all along,